to Fit to Speak from the archives. I'm Eugene Obah, glad as ever to be with you. We've got the third and final part of our conversation about cancel culture with Marcus Dowling, Taylor Maupin, and Raheem Dawodu Jr. So let's not waste any time and let's revisit that conversation that aired on September 3rd, 2020. Hello, and welcome to Fit to Speak. I'm Eugene Obah, so glad to have you with us. It's the third and final part of our conversation about cancel culture, and to begin, we ask, who is, and perhaps who isn't, getting canceled? Of course, Nick Cannon, with his podcast, he made anti-Semitic comments. His talk show is being pushed up to 2021. Interestingly, though, he's still going to host The Masked Singer on Fox. He was fired from Viacom and CBS. Ellen DeGeneres, she is having her own issues. Her show is her daytime talk show, that is under investigation, and so many people have come out against her. But then the celebrities that come on her show, including Jay Leno and Katy Perry, they all love her. They're saying, "Oh, she's great. She's never mistreated us or whatever." Let me start with Taylor here on this, on some of these people that have, you know, given us some material here tonight. Like, the question is, it's like, who's being canceled? Who isn't? And what do we make of some of these people and what's going on with this?
Yeah, he said anti-Semitic comments, but he also said racist comments where he was, yeah, I mean his words exactly were, those without melanin are a little less than those with melanin. So okay, that's like a racially supremacist statement that you're making, and there was not much outrage at all over that. Like, people are more outraged at the anti-Semitic, which he alluded to a Jewish banking conspiracy, I believe. I mean, I've heard it before, um, but like that's the point. Like, Nick Cannon, I don't think he should have been canceled. I think he, if he gets fired from his job, that's, you're it's freedom of speech, not freedom of consequences. But those consequences should never be mob rule. Mob rule should never be the answer. That is like when every societal and legal institution fails, then you revert to mob rule. Mob rule is not the go to of like, oh, hey, he said something bad that I disagree with. Let me form a mob. Like, I'm not going to join a mob, and I'm not going to start a mob. Like, we have laws for a reason. There are different ways of going about this. Yeah, there's definitely a difference between the Kevin Hart getting canceled and Ellen DeGeneres getting canceled. Ellen DeGeneres, it's her staff that is coming out against her, people that have firsthand experience with her. Of course, the celebrities that are guests on her show don't have any problem with her because they're, at her status, at her level, right? They're the guests of the show. If they had a bad time, they wouldn't come on the show. But her staff writers and all the other, day to day people, the salary employees, they don't like her at all. They don't feel that she's genuine at all, and that's a lot different from Kevin Hart, who had a tweet from 10 years ago that, some people think is homophobic, some people think is, just a stupid joke where, it's not homophobic at all. It mentions, if his son was gay, but it's not saying that he would disown his son. It's a joke. Um, Broader implications, if the celebrities are at least public figures, what would be not good would be if normal day to day people start getting canceled, which we've seen in the past, because normal people don't have millions of dollars, so they can't defend themselves. If they get doxxed, their home address and everything gets leaked, that puts their personal safety at risk. That puts everything at risk. This is some very interesting times that we're going into right now. And it's to the point where you can't even really make laws fast enough to keep up with the threats. So there's going to need to be a shift in consciousness to kind of revert back to the pre-internet era, right? Back when people lived in a small town and you knew everyone and just go up and talk to people, and there was none of this outrage, this polarization. A lot of that comes with the stress of being on the internet and knowing things and having access to things that humans did not have access to throughout all of human history until right now. So we are in uncharted territory as far as what we have access to and what the average person is capable of doing, of sharing, of creating.
I think that in a way, because a lot of these, going back to some of the earlier points about some of this stuff happening years ago, especially with, say, Kevin Hart and his tweets and some of the other stuff that goes on. The question that I've always kind of sort of had, and any of you can jump in on this, is that for how long, like, at a certain point, if you did anything like 9 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. Yes, okay, it's bad, but is there room for people to evolve? Is there room for people to grow?
I think there is. I think in the sense that, okay, so every time that social media comes back to you and they kind of like pick up famous people the last place they left them in their narrative. So if somebody got canceled, it's like, okay, well, let's go back to 2014 when we canceled them. And let's compare what we are examining now that they have created, done, or whatever against what they were canceled for in 2014. If there is demonstrable difference, then there's a potential for saving, but there's some kind of like retroactive retribution that you have to have and some kind of public, like, apology that serves as some kind of panacea, like, okay, yeah, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I did this thing that was really bad, and it's not reflective of who I am now. So now getting into this topic now, let's talk about how we feel about this. And it's weird because it's, again, that self-regulation thing about Twitter, where Twitter is its own separate society outside of IRL real-time life, where we have to like go back and say, okay, so where in our digital narrative do we find you? And where are you now? And then are we prepared to absolve you of this? It's some kind of like, you said earlier, Taylor, like kangaroo court kind of situation where it's like, okay, we're going to go back and say, okay, so we're going to like judge for you down in kangaroo court and move you ahead into the annals of history, which is crazy. You could be a contributing member of society again, which is absurd because it's not Twitter is real life. Twitter is more real than actual society right now. Which, again, I'm saying Twitter is more real than actual society right now. Ultimately, because of the coronavirus, it's astoundingly true because real lifetime has stopped.
Yes.
So Twitter is the only thing that's moving and shows.
And we have no distractions going on right now.
Yeah, which is it's fascinating to consider this in the sense of like how you deal with yourself spatially and also how you deal with not getting canceled every day. If you're like I'm a journalist and I write every day and I do things every day and I work for multiple outlets. But every day it's always like a shell game of like, okay, what do I do to not get canceled today? How do I triangulate this tweet that I'm gonna send to make sure that it lands squarely in a way that does not implicitly offend a group of people or a person or somebody of influence or whatever? And that's like a fascinating thing because it's like, okay, well, I shouldn't have to worry about this because I'm a rational, free-thinking human being. But no, because we are paused and Twitter is real life. It's the only life we have. Therefore, I have to be extraordinarily cautious in how I have conversations on this one thing that dominates our lives now. It's fascinating because we've never had it like this before, and we'll probably never have it like this again.
Yeah, and I think that really you pick up on the interesting point here, Marcus, is that because of the novel coronavirus, with everybody kind of sort of staying at home, all of these shutdowns and everything else, I think, and I've made a point to a lot of my other friends in the past, is that now people are with their own thoughts now. There's no distractions. There's no going to the mall, going to the bowling alley, or whatever. It's like, okay, time has kind of sort of stood still here. So I want to turn to some stuff about how people get it wrong, okay, in terms of cancel culture and what the consequences should be, if any. So here's something that Kayleigh McEnany had to say about cancel culture.
He's also appalled by cancel culture, and cancel culture specifically as it pertains to cops. We saw a few weeks ago that Paw Patrol, a cartoon show about cops, was canceled. The show Cops was canceled. Live PD was canceled. Lego halted the sales of their Lego City police station. It's really unfortunate.
Except that Paw Patrol is actually still on the air. So much for the promise that she made when she first was appointed as White House press secretary.
I will never lie to you. You have my word on that.
And then we have, of course, director James Gunn, who was fired, then rehired by Disney. And then in the comic sphere, you also have got Tom King apologizing to Jay Lee and accusing him of ties to Comic-Gate. Marcus, what should be the consequences of all this?
Okay, so the problem with that ultimately is that like the consequence is difficult because Twitter allows for niche communities to govern themselves in ways that they've never been able to govern themselves before, because these are all niche communities where people were not able to see each other for generations. Message boards are not instantaneous social contact. So when you have a situation like Comic-Gate, for instance, that whole situation, when you have people that never were able to interacting, and then interacting with vitriol, and then from there interacting to cancel each other, when previously they had never had the thought that they could ever talk to each other in real time. Mm-hmm. You have to think even deeper about the ramifications of canceling, not canceling, making a comeback, whatever. Like there's a whole other level of policing to that I don't think people consider. And ultimately, in that case, I feel like there has to be some sort of intra-communal conversation amongst the tastemakers and the arbiters of that culture, whoever they shall be. And that typically comes from people that when they come on when they're on the device, what they've done and their background and you understand their heritage, and you can see them and go, okay, so let's turn to person X. Okay, that's what they said. Great, now we can continue. So it gets back to that kangaroo court point, but these are issues that don't leave outside of their sphere on Twitter. So like when it's like Comic-Gate is largely comic Twitter issue. It doesn't escape into Black Twitter or to politics Twitter. It stays in comic Twitter. Comic Twitter is a big atmosphere. But within that atmosphere, you have to be able to look at that person and go, okay, you're the judge here. What are we going to do? How do we judge this person? How do you feel? In film Twitter for the situation with Disney, same thing. It's like they looked at this person and they said, okay, well, he's a jerk. He's a jerk. And they brought the pitchforks after him and he's out. Then Disney's like, hold on, but wait. We are going to adjudicate by doing our own independent study and then tell you, our fans, and then tell you, comic Twitter, or film Twitter, how to engage with this person because we're going to bring him back. And that's the easiest way to do it. Like, you ultimately have to allow for these niche communities to govern themselves because they've never been able to do this before. So, like, with everything else on Twitter, so say like sports Twitter, like ESPN has been around since 1977. So they've had public discourse space for 43 years. Like politics Twitter. Gosh, Meet the Press has been around since day one. And the McLaughlin Group and all these other spaces that are spaces where people who occupy various different sides of the spectrum can get together and have communal space, and then sort of kangaroo court. I love that kangaroo court term, Taylor, man. It's like, I'm going to take that with me when I leave here. I'm going to credit you every time I use it, but I'll take it with me every time I leave here. So it's like, okay, so in this kangaroo court, we're going to judge and say, yes, this is the opinion, and it trickles down from there. Again, all of these niche marketplaces where these things are happening, I think that the easiest way to look at this from the beginning is to say, okay, they've never had this before, so let's give them some space to figure this out amongst themselves before we allow any sort of decision to be made that is final. Because again, if you've never done it before, you have no archetype. You have no understanding of nuance. You're like brand new to this, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to do something crazy. And typically crazy things happen. But if you gave some time to nuance and develop something there, I think there's something that can really be said for that.
Taylor, what do you think?
I'll defend Kayleigh, our press secretary here for a minute. And, I wonder who's her intern getting these facts, because clearly Paw Patrol is not canceled, and clearly Lego is still producing their police Lego sets. I don't think it was an intentional lie, because it's such a non-consequential lie where it's like, oh no, Paw Patrol's canceled. Oh, wait a minute, no, it's not canceled. Like, it's not like a really good political move to lie about something as innocuous as a children's television show. I'll tell you what she absolutely nailed, and normally I find her accuracy to be pretty spot on. The show Cops was canceled as of June 10th. Live PD was canceled as of July 24th. A&E's views are down 50% since the reporting on that. The Lego group did not cancel their police Lego sets, but they did request that stores stop advertising for the police Lego sets. So they stopped bringing attention to the police sets. And that the point that she's making of cancel culture in general, where is the pro police voice from the Black community? It's not heard enough, in my view. And it's one that is much more common in that community than the media would have you think. According to the poll that Kayleigh alluded to in that same briefing, a Rasmussen report, which is a politically neutral organization, Blacks are the most concerned about public safety where they live by 67%, compared to 63% of whites and 65% of other minority groups. So that's the genuine conversation that is not being had, is Blacks that want police, that want better police, that want to maybe change the laws that the police enforce, maybe want to change the method in which those laws are enforced, but certainly doesn't want to completely get rid of police. Where's that voice in the media? It's not one that's being had. It's the anti-police, it's the radical voice. That one is the most loud. That one gets the most attention from both like tweets and retweets, and also the mainstream media.
To wrap this conversation up, okay, here's the final question. Think about all of the stuff that we've talked about here on this episode. Should cancel culture just go away? Raheem, I'll start with you. Should this just go away? And who is this helping or hurting? Is this just a feel good type of thing?
It's a feel good type of thing. I honestly, outside of a few cases, it doesn't impact things the way people kind of say. So I know Twitter is like the thing people are on a lot, but if you were on Twitter, if you went by what Twitter was saying, Bernie Sanders would be the nominee for president right now instead of Joe Biden. You know what I mean? Like that's
Mhm.
it amplifies voices, but it doesn't speak for um the majority of people. I don't think that cancel culture. I don't like it. I don't like seeing it. Because I'm very much on some like people should be able to grow, and unless you do something like really malicious and messed up, like it doesn't really affect me too much. But I think that from what I see from council culture and what Marcus mentioned earlier, it's usually people from the left and from communities that are usually like well, on Twitter at least, it's usually communities of people that are marginalized, and they tend to get canceled, and then about a week later it's back to normal business. And then on the right, they tried. I remember a couple years ago, like they tried to cancel Nike because of the Kaepernick commercial. You know what I mean? Like that, it didn't go anywhere. It was just like, and you were burning your Nike shoes and socks that you paid a lot of money
The
for. So
sales
it's like,
actually went up, if anything.
yeah,
Yeah.
it didn't make any sense. And so, um, what should be happening is boycott culture. Like if you're upset about something, boycott it. For real. Like, don't make these performative events. Don't burn your
Like your jerseys.
items and materials and stuff. Like, just say like, all right, I'm going to organize a boycott to go against this now. That's what needs to happen, and that'll make like real impact and on things of issues that you are really concerned with. But I don't think cancel culture. I think it's annoying and it pisses people off because it's so annoying, and it pisses people off because a lot of us in this conversation are on Twitter a lot, so we see that and we're like, but in terms of its actual impact, I don't think it means anything. But if you really want to have impact on these things, then we've learned throughout history that you got to go with the purse strings, and if you got the purse strings, then people will listen, and that's how things change in a society. So I think cancel culture is more annoying than it actually is impactful. So I don't know how strong or powerful it is, but it is definitely like something that I cringe at when I see, and it upsets me. Um, so yeah, there it is.
Yeah. And we're especially seeing money talking with the Washington football team here.
exactly
And
that.
it's-
Yep.
Mhm. Taylor, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a very, very important distinction between boycott culture and cancel culture. Boycott culture, I'm 100% for. I've participated myself in boycotts where I just say, you know what, I don't really support what you're supporting, so I'm going to go ahead and uh, redirect my resources from your organization to an alternative organization that does, support what I support and does, think how I think on the issues that are important to me. That is a very passive act. I'm not stopping anyone else from supporting that organization that I'm boycotting. I may try and talk to them and tell them about the boycott and why I think they should join the boycott, but I'm not going to stop them. Cancel culture is not something that only takes place online, it actually takes place in person. And in person, it just looks completely ridiculous. At these protests that we're seeing around the nation right now, we're seeing conversations completely shut down between protesters and police officers. And I could send you a video that I found of one Portland police officer who's black explaining how whenever he tries to have a conversation with a protester, another protester will come in and boom, shut the conversation down, say, no, screw the pigs. We're here to protest them. Don't talk to them. And one of the times that he mentioned specifically was a white, most likely Antifa, but certainly Black Lives Matter supporter shutting down the conversation a black police officer was having with, I believe it was a black protester. It could be another person of color, but it was a minority. It wasn't a white protester having a conversation. So basically, it's two minorities having a conversation and a white person coming in and interrupting and say, "Oh, no, don't have a conversation with that person of color. That's not how we think." That doesn't make any sense at all. Like, the way I explained it is what happened, but it's like I removed like the political charge and instead just left the racial charge to see how ridiculous it is. But since it's like in the name of liberalism, in the name of Black Lives Matter, in the name of, cancel culture or what have you, like, that's okay that like a white person would, or anybody, I don't care what your race is, would be allowed to interrupt two adults having a conversation. Like, this is not, they're, some of these protesters are behaving in a very cult-like manner, whereas like, oh no, cops aren't a part of our cult, don't talk to them. Like, no, now is the exact time to talk to your local police officer. If you're if you've never had a relationship at all on a personal level with a police officer and you are upset about policing or anything of that nature, it's the time to talk to them. It's the time to have that conversation. Police officers are people first, before they're officers. Their job is essential, and they have to enforce some corrupt laws and maybe take some orders from some corrupt police chiefs. It doesn't negate their necessity in society.
Marcus?
So I have a fascinating thought on this to close out. I hated cancel culture for a long, long time, until I had a conversation with my friend Tina's twin 15-year-old daughters, Anya and Rachel, last week when I was in preparation for this. I was just like having socially distanced lunch with them. And they said, cancel culture sucks, but it's only good because it forces us to learn about things that are getting canceled.
This is true.
So it's brilliant. I never thought of it this way. But there's something for the younger generation that is, they have social media as their life. Like TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, in that order. But if something gets canceled on Twitter, because Twitter's for the adults, like I'm 42, so to them I'm like 1,000 years old. Plus I'm bald. It's fascinating. Ultimately, they say, if adults say something is so heinous that it has to be canceled, and they're 15, they can go around their cell phones and look it up on Wikipedia. And because their reading comprehension skills, most kids under the age of 18 right now, read better than we did when we were 15. So they can go on Wikipedia and read something and go, okay, I'm going to go check out this New York Times piece, and I'm going to make up my mind myself. And if this person is worthy of being canceled, then I'm going to boycott, which is fascinating. I'm going to boycott this person and whatever they do. So, like, they looked up Colin Kaepernick when Nike got canceled. And they're like, oh, Colin Kaepernick's a quarterback who was, wrongly, accused of protesting as a negative act and has been blackballed from the NFL. So they're like, okay, number one, we like Colin Kaepernick, and whatever he does, we're going to support. Number two, we don't like professional football. So we're never going to watch football. And football, and we're not going to date boys that like, football, or girls that like football. We're just done with football because football's stupid. And it's fascinating because they made all of those intrinsic life decisions based off of cancellation. So if anything, because I feel like we've gone too far with cancel culture, so we're not going to be able to come back. If you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, you just can't. So it's a fascinating thing that happens out of that. Like, every time we do something, the kids get to learn. Mm-hmm. So it's like an amazing, fascinating, retroactive thing that happens. And then in 10 years, when they're 25, they're probably not going to be so quick to cancel because of the fact that they saw the generation before them literally pretty much try to cancel everyone. Like, during the pandemic, we've canceled about 1,000 people in 150 days. And we've successfully canceled like one or two. And we have a presidential nominee that we're trying to cancel right now. And the president should have been canceled a long time ago if we're playing by the rules of how people get canceled on social media. And he hasn't been. So there's a lot to parse through there, but I think that ultimately, for right now, it's good. Will it exist in 10 years? Probably not. But for right now, it ultimately serves a case of being a referendum point for all of us to think about our ideals and culture at large and how we want to ideally best see the world govern itself moving forward. If we don't trust the people that run the countries, then how do we govern ourselves? And I think that that's the larger conversation that comes out of cancel culture as a notion.
I think that cancel culture, what's been going on in a lot of these cases, has just been kind of crazy to me. I'm of the belief that those who are just willfully ignorant about issues and do not come at things with good faith, as we discussed earlier, I don't think those people should have a hearing. I think that we need people to be willing to tell the truth, and that if there is misinformation and all, and we come up with different sources that correct a lot of that, I think we should really modify our stuff accordingly. I think the way forward is for people to just continue to actually speak the truth and be able to really put out the information, and for media outlets to actually serve the public interest and not be catering to too many of the people who are just not willing to discuss issues and all that in good faith. The good news is that here at CSC Media, we've got 3 people that are willing to discuss things in good faith, and I am so happy to have had you on the program here this month, and hopefully we will do more stuff again. Okay, so Marcus Dowling, Taylor Maupin, Raheem Dawodu Jr., thank you guys so much for joining me today. A quick note, since airing that episode nearly 2 years ago, both Ellen DeGeneres and Nick Cannon's daytime talk shows have ended. In Nick's case, it was actually canceled. But back to Ellen for a second. I knew from this article in the New York Times, which I recall reading in the pre-COVID era on our crumbling metro rail system in D.C., that her show was living on borrowed time. This fall, Jennifer Hudson will be hosting a daytime show with the same producing team that was with Ellen. The jury's out as to whether she, along with Kelly Clarkson, who is inheriting many of Ellen's time slots in many markets, will, on the ratings front, become beneficiaries. Another possible ratings beneficiary could be Drew Barrymore, whose show is returning for a 3rd season that will be split into 2 half hours in most markets. Who knows whether or not that's going to work, but one thing's for sure, I remain very bullish on Drew's longevity in the genre. Next week on Fit to Speak from the Archives, we'll revisit our discussion about content creation and podcasting in the novel coronavirus pandemic. You might recall that former and twice impeached U.S. President Donald Trump and former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wanted to ban TikTok. You see how well that worked out. Anyway, I had Marcus Dowling and Brittany Johnson on the show to discuss whether or not new players in the TikTok and podcasting spaces could emerge in the COVID era. And I spoke to somebody who did launch a podcast in 2020, Kristen Vermeulen, about the maker economy in Maine, a very unique subject matter. I hope you'll be able to join us. In the meantime, be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts, and be sure to check out our Substack and Patreon pages for exclusive content and to support all of the work that we do here. Finally, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell on our YouTube channel so that you do not miss any of our episodes. Until next week, I'm Eugene Obah. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the best things in life are worth saving.